Hi, welcome to the second section of the course, Configuring DNS. In this section we will cover topics such as setting up your system to talk to a name server, setting up a local recursive resolver, configuring dynamic DNS on your local network, setting up a name server for your public domain, setting up a slave name servers. So let's begin with the first video of this section, setting up your system to talk to a name server. In this video we will configure Linux to use a DNS server and add a domain line. In the previous video we did some basic testing of your network connection by pinging other hosts by IP address directly. However, I'm sure you'd rather not visit web pages by requesting them by IP address rather than by the domain name. This problem is solved using a recursive DNS server to resolve the host names into IP addresses, which your computer can then connect to. Let's see how to do it. Let's set up a DNS server to resolve the host names into IP addresses. Configuring Linux to use a DNS server is very easy. Just add a single line to etc resolve.conf. Nameserver 8.8.8.8. You may also want to add a domain line, which will allow you to access things by their host name rather than by their fully qualified domain name, FQDN. For example, domainexample.org in resolve.conf will allow you to ping mail.example.org as just mail. If your system uses DHCP for receiving its IP address, then the content of this file can be managed through the configuration of the DHCP server. This makes easier management of name server IPs and domains on your network possible. Now let's see how it works. The name server line in etc resolve.conf provides the IP address of a name server that your system is allowed to query against. In this particular example, we're using 8.8.8.8, which is a publicly available recursive DNS server owned and operated by Google. You may also want to consider using a name server provided by OpenDNS or one provided by your ISP. A properly configured recursive name server is restricted to only allow queries from the intended users, so you'll want to make sure that you're either using one intended for the general public or one intended specifically for you. When your system attempts to contact a site, the browser will attempt to see if the matching IP address already exists in the browser's hostname cache. If it does not, it issues a getHostByName request to the local C library, which then checks its local configuration in etc nsswitch.conf to determine how lookups should be performed. You may find something similar to hosts, files DNS in that file, which indicates that for finding host information, you should first look at local files such as etc hosts, and you should check DNS if that fails. Assuming that you didn't have a matching entry in etc hosts, you'll see library's stub DNS resolver will look in etc resolve.conf for the IP address of your DNS server and will then send a DNS query with recursion enabled over UDP port 53 to the listed DNS server. The server will check its local cache for an answer and will issue queries to the various authoritative name servers, starting with the name servers of the DNS route, followed by org and then finally example. The name servers for example will pass back the IP address associated with www.example.org to your recursive name server, which will then pass it back to you. Great! So in this video we saw setting up your system to talk to a name server.